All right, please nobody take this the wrong way, but a lot of y'all don't know what socialism is or where it came from, and it shows. As usual, history has some receipts for us to better understand this concept. So the word socialism actually came from a concept called the social question, and this is something that came up with the Industrial Revolution. So industrialization started the late 1700s into the early 1800s. While industrialization created a lot of wealth for some sectors, it also brought with it a lot of new types of poverty and new challenges in terms of the way labor and work was changing and the environmental impact that had, urbanization and population density, and all kinds of challenges that came with it. All those different questions on how industrialization was affecting society, that was just termed the social question. And so people had different approaches to how to manage the social question. Free market liberals thought that the free market would take care of it. Some politicians and others in charity work thought that there needed to be laws to control some of the strains of the social question. So a big one that was discussed and passed were certain laws against child labor. Even the early child labor laws are just astounding. It was like limiting child labor to 8 hours a day instead of an unlimited number of hours a day. Or eventually there were laws made that like kids couldn't work in mines underground, things like that. And there were those that thought, free market liberals that thought that those kind of laws were morally wrong, but also ultimately going to be wrong for the economy and society. And that was a whole debate. Now, socialism, and specifically democratic socialism, so socialism started as the idea that there needed to be changes to the way the economy was running itself that would alleviate a lot of the problems and challenges that came out of industrialization. So some of the early versions of this labor organization, the first one was in 1818 in Manchester, which was one of the big first industrialized cities. There were others, and Robert Owen set out to kind of make model versions of what he and other socialists envisioned of how labor could be organized. And so he created like these kind of utopian communities where workers in these factories had things like minimum number of hours that they could work. The children went to school, that those working on the products also received services that were funded from the profits of the products that they made. There were groups like the Chartists, and this was named after a charter, like a petition that they wrote with certain demands. And you can see here, even in this advertisement that went out for a Chartist meeting, they specifically did not want to be associated with like revolutionary rabble, which is why it says their peace and order is our motto. But a lot of the demands that they were making of their grievances, this was the basic ideas of socialism as it was developing. Demand a fair day's wages for a fair day's work. We are slaves of capital. We demand protection to our labor. We are political serfs. We demand to be free. So it wasn't just like, quirky utopians, but there were also some political organizing, labor organizing. Chartists also demanded that those without property would be able to vote, because that wasn't yet the case in Britain. And the British Parliament rejected the petition both times that it came to Parliament, in 1839 and 1842. But this was the core of socialist thinking. And then there were some ideologues, some people that tried to flesh out what socialism meant and the ideology behind it. So some examples of that were the French thinkers Louis Blanc, his book Organization of Labor in 1840, and then J.P. Proudhon, who wrote What is Property, also in 1840. And I love this image of Proudhon with his children. These could be my kids. They're good poster children for not being in the mines, as it were. And so these were some of the building blocks to socialism. By the end of the 1840s, another interpretation or application of socialism was developed by the infamous Karl Marx and his colleague Friedrich Engels. In 1847, the two founded the Communist League in France, and then 1848 put out the Communist Manifesto, and then Marx kept writing and expanding upon this. This was a very specific, very different take on the direction of socialism. Proudhon and Marx had an exchange about the differences of their ideas, and while they recognized the similar sources of a lot of the economic and social problems that they were seeing from unfettered capitalism. They had very different takes. Proudhon was not compelled by Marx's version of history. He even said that what Marx was doing was almost more similar to like a religious dogma, which honestly, the way it all ends up playing out in history, I think that that was kind of prophetic on Proudhon's part. So I'll end here with this political cartoon from the mid 1800s from one of the big progressive publications in Britain. And you can see here some people living really nice, but children going through these mine shafts and people suffering. And I don't fully know all that's going on here. But all that to say, socialism was a kind of a mixed multitude of ways of trying to address these things in the political process. So democratic socialism by expanding the vote so that these people would be able to vote and not just have everything run by the people on the top. That the wealth generated from the work from these people on the bottom would get invested into services that would be for their benefit. Public education was a big one that was discussed, especially if these people on the bottom were going to be able to vote. They needed to be educated to know how to vote. That was what socialism was. Later, 30 years after people were working through this, Karl Marx made like the communist version of this. And the many different ways that Marxist communism was implemented eventually, yes, it got really, really bad. However, it was not socialism. And socialism is not that. So all that to say, Zohan Mamdani is not a communist. And if you only take away one thing from this video, it should be that. And now you know.